Good morning, Mr. Bishop. Can you hear me?
Yes, good morning, Sir Brian. I can hear you loud and clear.
And you can see me?
I can indeed.
Good. Now, you are, where are you?
I'm in Eastbourne,
In your house or in a hotel or?
in a hotel.
And who's with you?
An engineer at the moment.
Okay. In a moment or two, I'm going to ask that Mary administers the oath, and then Ms. Richards will have some questions for you. But let me first explain that you're talking to a group of about 50 people here in Aldwych House in central London. But you're also talking to an unknown number. It may well be 100 to 200 people who will be watching most of the time throughout the day on the media channel. We are live streamed, and if it's so they are your wider audience, and there are representatives of the press here or watching as well. So let Mary ask you to take the oath.
Please state your full name.
Christopher Roy Bishop.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Bishop, can you see and hear me?
And
Okay. I'm just going to ask you first of all about your career. As I understand it, you started work for Armour in 1969.
yes,
And then between 1973 and 1979, you were the products and marketing manager at Armour. And the significance of that period is that plasma products, Factor VIII concentrate, was launched in the UK in 1976. Is that right? And then 1979 to 1981, you were the sales and marketing manager at Armour, and that gave you responsibility for the sales field force.
yes.
I'm so sorry. That is my phone, which is really quite extraordinarily embarrassing. It happens to the best of us. I'm sorry, Mr. Bishop, my phone went off.
Okay, no problem.
So 1979 to 1981, your responsibility included responsibility for the sales field force, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
1981 to 1987, you were manager of the biologicals division at Armour, and that gave you oversight of a number of countries, including the UK, but also Ireland, France, Scandinavia, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then 1987 to 1993, you were the managing director at Armour UK. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And you left in 1993, but you remained a consultant on an ad hoc basis for about 3 years.
Yes, yeah.
Can you recall what, if any, training you received from Armour, either when you first joined the company or as you progressed through these various roles?
It was very much training on the job.
So no formal training?
Initially, I would have received, obviously, more intense training on the products that I was responsible for marketing and selling.
You provided evidence, your statement tells us, in criminal proceedings in Canada. Those were, I think, the criminal proceedings against a number of organisations and bodies, including Armour and Dr. Riddell. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
And you also gave a deposition, an oral deposition, in the UK, but relating to proceedings against Armour in Pennsylvania. Is that right?
That's correct, although I do not actually recall that particular deposition. The Canadian one I do recall very well.
Well, we may look at later in the course of the day the incomplete copy of the 1990 deposition that we've got. We'll see how time pans out. I'm going to ask for your witness statement to go up on screen, Mr. Bishop. It's WITN 5529001. And I'm going to ask you to look at paragraph 7 on page 5. So you'll see there a question asked you to identify senior colleagues involved in decision-making as regards the assessment of risks of infection, viral inactivation measures and the response to the risks of HIV and AIDS, or indeed the other matters you were asked about. You say in your answer, it was not my role to participate in the decision-making as regards the issues identified in the question, and to the best of my recollection, I did not do so. Now, you've been provided with a number of further documents since you made this statement. Does that remain your evidence that it wasn't your role to participate in decision-making relating to these issues?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we may come back to that then at the end of the day, Mr. Bishop, when we've looked at some of the underlying material. Whose role then was it within Armour UK to participate in decision-making as regards assessment of risks of infection and how to respond to those risks?
That would really have been under the jurisdiction of the of Armour US, and the regulatory medical people in the UK would have been consulted and appraised of discussions on those, but would not have been actually taking decisions. It would have been from the United States.
If we just look at some of the names you've then set out, and perhaps I can ask you to help us with understanding a little more about their role. Mr. Fitch, whose name we see on a number of the documents, Corporate Managing Director, what was his essential role at Armour UK?
Well, he was the corporate, as I said, the corporate managing director who oversaw the pharmaceutical operation of the operation, and also the plasma side.
So, was he the most senior person in Armour UK?
Yes.
And then Mr. Mitchellmore, senior executive, what was his role?
Similar, he was deputy to Ken Fitch, and I'm not sure. It's a long time ago, but I think he may well have taken over from Ken Fitch.
Okay. If we go over the page, please, Shomik. Top of the next page. You've then identified Peter Lloyd, Robin James, Quality Control. What was their role?
They were quality control for the whole operation, both the plasmas products and the pharmaceutical products, which were manufactured in Eastbourne.
You've then identified 4 individuals for regulatory affairs, and we certainly see their names on various documents: Mr. Brooks, Mr. Butchett, Mr. Collins, Mr. Tarbit. As I understand both your statement and the evidence that you've given a few minutes ago, it's that department, is it, that would have been primarily liaising with Armour US to get information about safety of products and how to respond?
Yes, them and those listed under G.
Medical affairs.
Medical affairs, yeah.
Okay, so that's, I think the names we see probably most on the documents which we're going to be looking at will be Dr. Christie and Dr. Harris. Does that accord with your recollection?
It's Mr. Christie, he wasn't a doctor.
So Mr. Christie, and then the others, were the others all doctors?
Yes. Yeah, Robert Christie's speciality was pharmaceutical.
We can take that down, thank you, Seamus. Prior to the advent of AIDS, so in the period in the 70s through to the early 80s, through to, say, 1982, to what extent was there interaction between Armour UK and Armour US?
There would be discussions back and forth, information fed from the UK operation and field operation relating to these matters with clinicians would be reported back to our own medical department in Eastbourne and then onward to the States, or indeed directly from the marketing department to the marketing people in the States, who would then pass that on to their own medical and regulatory people.
And I think a name we see quite often on the documentation is Anita Besler. Was she your equivalent in the States?
She was in a more senior position to me in the States. I think she was vice president, something like that.
But she was in the marketing
yes,
department,
marketing
as it were.
and sales. Yes.
When AIDS became an issue, and we'll be looking at this in more detail in the course of the day, but let's say 1983 onwards for the purposes of the question, did the relationship with or dependence upon Armour US change? Was there a greater degree of interaction at that point?
No, sorry. Could you repeat that?
Yes. Once AIDS became a live issue, was there a greater degree of interaction between Armour UK and Armour US?
Yes.
What was the relationship within the UK between Armour UK and those whom you were working with within Armour UK and the other pharmaceutical companies selling factor concentrates in the UK?
Where we would meet, obviously, at national and international clinical meetings, symposia, haemophilia society meetings, etc.
To what extent was there any form of information sharing between Armour and its rivals or competitors within the UK market?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, the only people I interacted with were my equivalent marketing and sales people in those companies, and naturally we at symposia, etc., we would be listening to the same clinical presentations and would be drawing on the same information.
Was there any system of sharing knowledge about new and emerging risks, for example, between the different companies?
Certainly not between the marketing people, and I don't know of any interrelation with the medical and regulatory people. It may have been in the States, but certainly not in the UK.
I'm going to ask you to look at a document now which contains a code of practice for the pharmaceutical industry. Shomik, it's ABPI 5015, please. You'll see, Mr. Bishop, this is the ABPI's datasheet compendium, and this one happens to be for 1978. If we go to page 5, you'll see there Code of Practice for the Pharmaceutical Industry, 4th edition, January 1974. And we can see in the paragraphs below that it refers to members of the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry have agreed to voluntarily observe the principles set out in a Code of Practice for the Pharmaceutical Industry, a code which regulates the standards of conduct to be followed in the marketing of medicines intended for use under medical supervision. And then it tells us that this was first published in 1958 and has been regularly revised. So this is the 1974 version, the version in force at the time Armour began selling factor concentrates in the UK. Were you familiar with this code of practice at the time, Mr. Bishop?
Yes, and we conform strictly to it under the strict guidance and strict guidance and examination of our own medical regulatory department.
So there was a degree of internal regulation, was there, from your medical department? Was there any external regulation of whether you were complying with this?
Our medical department ensured that we can, in our promotion and the action of our plasma specialists in the field, that they conformed to the code of practice. And our specialists were so well trained that these principles were embodied in their activities.
So your sales team, I think sometimes referred to as the field force in the documents, they would have been specifically trained about this code of practice, would they?
Yes.
If we just look, for example, down the bottom half of this page, please, show me paragraph F, we can see the code emphasises the importance in the public interest of providing the medical and allied professions with accurate, fair and objective information on medical products so that rational prescribing decisions can be made. That was the guiding principle, was it, to which you were expected to operate?
Yes, yeah.
If we just go over...
We did.
If we go over the page, please. Top of this page, paragraph 3. Just look at paragraph 3.2. Information about medical products should accurately reflect current knowledge or responsible opinion. And then 3.3, information about medical products must be accurate, balanced, and must not mislead, either directly or by implication. 3.4, information must be capable of substantiation, such substantiation being provided without delay at the request of members of the medical profession. Again, were those part of the principles to which you were expected to adhere?
Yes.
And then if we go to the bottom of the next page, please, Shomek. Paragraph 11, very bottom of the page, has a heading medical representatives. And it says representatives must be thoroughly trained, possess sufficient medical and technical knowledge to present information on the company's products in an efficient manner. What was your understanding of what a medical representative was? Did that encompass you and your workforce?
Well, that was we didn't call them representatives, we called them plasma specialists. And they were very, very highly trained in the subject of haemophilia, AIDS as it developed, and hepatitis C. They were fully empathetic of the field in which they worked. They had sufficient knowledge to be able to discuss issues with the Haemophilia Society, the haemophilia directors, and they were particularly respected for that. In addition to that, they had very effective support from both from the medical department, especially in the form of regular technical bulletins, which were produced from the clinical papers published at the time. They were very highly respected specialist people.
We'll come back to some of these themes, Mr. Bishop, as we go through the documents. This is really by way of introduction. If we go over the page, please, Shomek. Bottom of the page, paragraph 13. Gifts and inducements, subject to clause 13.2, no gifts or financial inducements shall be offered or given to members of the medical profession for the purposes of sales promotion. Gifts in the form of articles designed as promotional aids, whether related to a particular product or of general utility, may be distributed to members of the medical and allied professions, provided the gift is inexpensive and relevant to the practice of medicine or pharmacy. What kind of, if any, articles or gifts did ARMA provide to clinicians, for example, to whom it was promoting its products?
Pens, pads. If it was a particular conference, we might have provided folders for their clinical papers and notes, etc. Other than that, there might have been. No, I can't. Oh, perhaps we might have given away. Yes, we did. A calculator, a little pocket calculator at one time, and a little paperweight at one time. That was the extent of our gifts.
And then if we look at paragraph 16, please, bottom half of the page, Shomik. Relations with the general public and lay communication media. Requests from individual members of the public for information or advice on personal medical matters must always be refused, and the inquirer recommended to consult his or her own doctor. Information about a scientific discovery or a medical product should normally be supplied only where it's desirable or necessary to do so in the public interest, or where the object is to keep the public informed of scientific and medical progress. And then there's a reference to disclosure to the public as shareholders or persons with some other special and valid interest. Information must be presented in a balanced way to avoid the risk of raising unfounded hopes in the public mind from the results of treatment. Statements must not be made or designed for the purpose of encouraging members of the public to ask their doctor to prescribe a product. Is it right to understand from that the expectation was that your dealings would be primarily with doctors, NHS bodies, health authorities and the like?
In the main, yes, but there would have been interaction with the UK Haemophilia Society, where we would support and help towards their annual conference, as indeed other companies did also. That would be obviously at these conferences of the Haemophilia Society, their annual meeting. Patients would be there because they make up members of the society, executive, etc. And there would have been discussions, but purely. I remember I think there's one document which refers to me referring a request for information from one of these patients who came to me at a particular meeting, which I didn't comment on, and informed him that I would pass this to the medical department, which I did. For further action, we didn't get into a discussion with an individual patient.
Okay, we may come back to that, but I think, just so that there's no confusion, you're referring to an interaction in around March 1986. Is that right? When I think someone, you say, reported to you at a society meeting that they had seroconverted from heat-treated factor VIII. Is that right?
Yeah, I saw one paper, but in general, we would have kept the Haemophilia Society appraised of scientific developments.
And I'll ask you a little more about the society in due... Carry on, sorry.
Sorry? No.
I'll come back and ask you about the society in due course. More generally, is it right to understand that although this code of practice restricted direct communications with individual members of the public for information or advice on matters relating to their personal medical situation, ARMA nonetheless communicated to the public or to patients, not least through what was on a package label or a data sheet or a product insert? So the information that was supplied with your product was there to be read, in theory at least, by patients?
No, that would have been through their haemophilia centre.
So when ARMA was producing the content of its product labels or its package inserts, it was producing them in the expectation that they would be read and considered by doctors rather than patients. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Did you, so we can take that down, thank you, Seamus. Did you or anyone in the sales force receive money by way of commission or bonus?
Well, we would have been on targets from the company
Did those,
and would have received, yes, we would have received bonuses.
so the amount which sales representatives received in terms of their own personal income from Armour would, to some extent at least, be reflective of the volume of sales that they were able to make?
Yes, as it would be with any sales and marketing organisation.
Now, I want to ask you a little about, first of all, hepatitis. As at 1976, when factor concentrates were first launched by Armour in the UK, what, to the best of your recollection, was your knowledge and understanding of hepatitis B and of non-A, non-B hepatitis?
Well, at the time of the launch, there was everybody, the general public knew the risks from hepatitis B, from blood and body fluids, etc. At that time, non-A, non-B wasn't on the in the domain.
Okay. Can you recall how and when, very roughly, you learnt about non-A, non-B hepatitis?
No, I can't remember. The time, but when it did appear, the general consensus of the scientific fraternity was that non-A, non-B was a mild flu-like reaction.
Was that...
And as science developed, it's obviously turned out to be something more than that.
When you say the consensus of the scientific community, was that what you understood the position to be from your own reading, or was that what you were being told by your medical department?
That's what we were told by clinicians, and I think it was in the literature as well.
If we just go back to your witness statement, please, Shamik, could we have that back on screen? WITN 5529001. And we go to page 7, please, top of the page. So you're asked a question at the top of the page about your knowledge and understanding in relation to risks, in particular of hepatitis. Picking it up in the second part of your answer, you say this: as the medical and regulatory affairs personnel at Armour UK gained knowledge about AIDS and non-A, non-B hepatitis C, they kept me informed. This information would have come from published clinical papers, medical symposia and regular and punctual medical bulletins, and you give an example which we'll look at in a while. I'm also aware that the risk of transmission of hepatitis was included on the labelling. So when you describe being kept informed by your medical and regulatory affairs colleagues, would you yourself expect to be seeing the clinical papers, attending some of the symposia and receiving the medical bulletins?
Yes.
Okay. We'll come back to the question of labelling shortly, but as a general question then, you'd expect your medical and regulatory colleagues to be keeping up to date with the developing scientific and medical knowledge, and in turn to keep you up to date.
Yes, and it was done meticulously. I recall that that there was a system within the medical regulatory affairs department. There was a system for them to automatically be advised of any subjects or clinical papers or lay press reports or relating to the subject, which they would then scrutinise and then put out in a medical bulletin, which I would then pass on to the sales force to keep them informed as well of the current thinking. It was a meticulous exercise.
So, but by way of just general example, if say in a prominent medical publication such as the Lancet or something equivalent, a leading haemophilia clinician published about liver disease, you'd expect that to come to the attention of your medical department and be passed on to you?
It would, yes.
And then if we can look at a document from 1981, please, ARMO 40229. This is a publication called Plasma Perspectives, July 1981. Do you recall this publication?
Yes, I do.
And what, in broad terms, was its purpose, as far as you can recall?
Well, to keep everybody informed of the current state of art.
And then, if we just go to page 3 and we look at what's said about non-A, non-B hepatitis. So there's top right-hand side, please, Shomik, there's a heading non-A, non-B hepatitis. It says, this is now the most common form of hepatitis that follows the transfusion of blood and certain plasma derivatives. Specific laboratory tests for the identification of this most recently recognised type of hepatitis are not yet available, so that diagnosis can only be made by exclusion of hepatitis A and B. However, much information is available on its epidemiology and clinical features. Studies of the histopathological sequelae of acute non-A, non-B infections indicate that chronic liver damage, which may be severe, may occur in as many as 40 to 50% of the patients whose infection is associated with blood transfusion or with treatment by hemodialysis. So would it be fair to say, Mr. Bishop, that certainly by 1981, which is when this publication was issued, you and your colleagues would have been aware that non-A, non-B hepatitis could lead to severe and chronic liver damage?
Yes.
We can take that down, thank you. Can I then just ask you again to cast your mind back to 1975, 1976, when Armour would be about to launch onto the UK market its Factor VIII concentrate. We know that there was a World in Action documentary broadcast in December 1975 called Blood Money, which talked about the practices of plasma collection in the States and talked about implications in terms of transmission of hepatitis to recipients of concentrate treatment. Do you recall whether you saw that documentary at the time, Mr. Bishop?
No, I don't recall.
Do you recall any discussion about it within the company in the UK?
Not in specific terms, except on reading the document. We believed that our products were not the subject of, or our plasma collection was not the subject of that programme.
You were aware, however, presumably, that Armour's plasma did come from paid donors in the US?
Yes, but wholly owned by Armour. Controlled by Armour.
You're referring there to the Plasma Alliance plasmapheresis centres in the States?
Well, and prior to that, the centres that Armour owned, I forget the name of them, but subsequently became Plasma Alliance.
So was it, again, I'm conscious I'm asking you about events obviously a long time ago, Mr. Bishop, but as far as you can recall, was the feeling within Armour that the message of the World in Action documentary didn't really apply to Armour's product?
Yes, definitely. Did not.
More broadly, what did you understand Armour's responsibilities to be as regards explaining to the clinicians or NHS bodies to whom you were promoting your product the risks of hepatitis or other potential adverse consequences or reactions?
That was not my remit.
So when you or your sales force were out in the field talking to haemophilia clinicians or talking to those in regional health authorities, was it not part of the sales representative's responsibilities to talk to doctors about the risks from using the product?
It would have come up obviously during discussions, but the reassurance in the minds of everybody in the Armour company, which was portrayed to the clinicians, that the risks associated with the collection of material for our products was beyond reproach.
So is this right? And please correct me if I'm misunderstood, Mr. Bishop. And we're talking here really about the second half of the 70s, the beginning of the 1980s. Your expectation is that your staff wouldn't have been proactively raising issues about hepatitis with clinicians, but they would respond if clinicians raised it and would give reassurance about the safety of the Armour product?
Yes. And that would be reinforced by our medical department, if necessary.
If we go back to your statement again, WITN 5529001, and we go to page 9, so it's question 16, or paragraph 16. You were asked what, if any, steps were taken to ensure that A, NHS bodies and or clinicians purchasing and or using Armour products were made aware of the risks of hepatitis. You say that the risk of hepatitis infection was universally known before Armour UK began marketing Factor Concentrate. The label always warned of such risk, and we'll look at a couple of sample labels in the course of the morning. And then you say this, appropriate and timely medical bulletin/position statements, and you give an example, would be produced and circulated by the UK Medical and Regulatory Affairs departments to both haemophilia centres and NHS bodies alike. So looking at that second part of the paragraph, Mr. Bishop, was it your understanding that Armour, through its Medical and Regulatory Affairs department, would be providing updates about medical and scientific knowledge directly to haemophilia centres and NHS bodies?
Yes.
If we look at the example you've given in that paragraph, which is ARMO 40614_002, you'll see this is directed to the plasma team. Who exactly were the plasma team, Mr. Bishop?
They were the plasma specialists in the field. Well, and myself, of course.
So you and your team, whose job it was essentially to market and sell the plasma products?
Yeah, yeah.
It's from Mr. Christie, and this particular bulletin happens to be from October of 1986. Now, we've then got the heading, this medical bulletin is not for distribution to the medical profession and is for your attention only. So that would suggest this wasn't the kind of material that went directly to haemophilia clinicians or centres. Would you accept that?
Yes, this particular document wouldn't have been. Sorry, yeah, no, this particular document wouldn't have been distributed.
But your recollection is, or expectation is, that relevant developments would have been distributed in some form of bulletin or statement? Only as it would have affected the Armour products. So what kind of information would you have expected your medical or regulatory affairs department to be providing directly to, say, haemophilia centres?
Information as it related to the impact or relevance to our own products.
So if there was, for example, general information about risks of hepatitis from factor concentrates more broadly, or risk of AIDS from factor concentrates or from blood transfusion more broadly, would you have expected your medical and regulatory departments to be sharing that kind of information with haemophilia centres?
No, not general information, because the haemophilia centre directors would have that information anyway.
So it would be a study or a piece of information or a piece of research directly about ARMA's own products that you'd expect to be shared with haemophilia centres?
Yes. Yeah.
And then could we look, please, at ARMO 40458. You'll see, Mr. Bishop, this is dated the 20th of January 1986, and it's from you to L. Lucas, Lofty Lucas. Who was that?
He was a successor to Anita Bessler, I think,
Okay.
in the States.
Okay, so someone within the marketing department in the States. We can see the subject
Yes,
is
yeah.
non-A, non-B hepatitis, clean virgin patients with ARMA factor 8 IP/HT. And am I right in understanding that's intermediate potency and heat treatment, or heat treated?
The heat-treated intermediate purity product, yes.
And then it says, Dear Lofty, for your information, I enclose a copy of a letter from Bob Christie to Dr. Green at St Mary's Hospital, Portsmouth, and copies of correspondence with Dr. Kernoff, from which you will see that we've had a further 3 reports of hitherto clean virgin patients treated with our heat-treated product, all of whom have succumbed to non-A, non-B hepatitis. Although the evidence is not totally conclusive, it is pretty strong against the ARMA product, and the last paragraph of Peter Kernoff's letter is indicative of the problems which we're now facing. If Peter's 2 patients had been clean and remained clean, he would have, I am sure, reverted to the ARMA product. As it is, he will continue with the alpha to our total exclusion. The plea, once again, therefore, is a revision of our heat treating process and or evidence of just 1 clean virgin patient treated with ARMA's heat-treated product surviving non-A, non-B contamination. Now, I'm going to come on, probably this afternoon, Mr. Bishop, to the question of seroconversion to HTLV3 from ARMA's heat-treated product. But just looking at this document, it's apparent that information has come to your attention about seroconversions to non-A, non-B hepatitis, specifically from an ARMA product.
Yeah.
Would that information have been shared more widely by ARMA with haemophilia clinicians in the UK?
Not at that stage, no.
Why not?
Well, because it would have to be appropriately researched and confirmed by the medical technical department.
So what with this piece of information, what was your expectation of what would be done with this information?
That it would be passed to the research people and development people in the States to, if the evidence was correct, to up our own heat-treated process.
In the meantime, however, haemophilia clinicians would have been potentially treating what you describe as clean virgin patients with a product that you now knew was transmitting non-A, non-B hepatitis. Isn't that something that clinicians should have been told?
We didn't know. It says there that the evidence is not totally conclusive. So we didn't know for sure that was a problem.
So pretty strong evidence, and I'm looking at the phrase you use in this memo, wouldn't be enough to trigger you telling clinicians about the problem?
that wouldn't have been my decision.
Whose decision would it have been?
The US, and then through the US medical departments, through our own medical department.
If you or a member of your sales force at the time, having seen this information, had been asked by a haemophilia clinician about the safety of the Armour heat-treated product in relation to non-A, non-B hepatitis, how hypothetically do you think you would have answered?
That they would refer the matter back, that concern back to the medical department.
So you wouldn't have answered a clinician who expressly asked about it by saying, we do know of cases where the evidence is pretty strong but still remains to be confirmed, that clean virgin patients are succumbing to non-A, non-B hepatitis?
Well, that could have come up in general conversation, you know, because our people had a very, very close relationship with the directors. So there would have been discussions backwards and forwards, but at the end of the day, the concern that was being expressed would have been referred back to our medical department to make further contact, if appropriate, with that centre director.
We can take that down, thank you. I'm just going to ask you a little now about the licensing process and product warnings on labels and data sheets and the like. Firstly, within the United Kingdom, so within Armour UK, whose responsibility was it to submit the licence application and approve the content of any product warnings?
Medical and regulatory departments.
What involvement or role did you have in that process?
Absolutely none.
I think we perhaps later on in the years see, I think, a request by you, I'll check and correct it if I'm wrong, Mr Bishop, to want to see what's being put on a label. I think by this time we're in the mid-80s or so on. Did there ever come a point in time, as far as you can recall, when you wanted to have the content of labels run by you?
No, never.
Well, let's look, shall we, at a handful of documents.
I would say it would be totally inappropriate for that sort of subject to be discussed with marketing people.
If we go to DHSC 303742_077, please, Shomek. So this is an internal Department of Health document, Mr Bishop, not something you would ever have seen at the time, but it talks about Armour's application for a licence for Factor 8. So it's January 1976, and it says this: at the meeting with Dr Owen, that's David Owen, Minister of Health, in connection with the TV programme about Factor 8, he indicated he'd wish to see any further applications for product licences to authorise the importation of Factor 8. Accordingly, we've prepared a submission about the application from Armour Pharmaceutical Company. I understand that Supply Division have received a very favourable tender from the company for the supply of Factor 8 to haemophilia centres, but of course action on this depends upon the granting of a product licence. Now, just pausing there, you've told us you weren't involved in the licence application process. Would you have been involved in the submission of a tender to the Department of Health Supply Division?
Yes, yeah.
And I'll come on to some of the marketing techniques and approaches, but when this talks about a very favourable tender, is that likely, do you think, to be talking about the price at which the product was being offered?
Probably, yes.
And then the paragraph continues, the memo continues, while the submission was being typed, I received a telephone call from a representative of the company inquiring as to the outcome of their application. And then there's a discussion about sounding out the company's representative. Would that have been, do you think, you, or is it more likely it would have been someone from the regulatory or medical department?
Definitely the regulatory department. Marketing would have absolutely nothing to do with product licence applications.
We can take that down, thank you, Shomek. Now, as we've seen from your statement, you've said in your statement that you were aware the risk of transmission of hepatitis was included on the labelling of the concentrate.
Yes.
As more was learnt about non-A, non-B hepatitis and its connection with liver disease, would you have expected ARMA to reflect that developing knowledge in its labelling of products?
No, because it related to hepatitis. Whether it didn't stipulate hepatitis B or non-A, non-B. Just said risks of hepatitis. So there would have been no need to have changed it.
Would you have expected ARMA to include information about the risk of AIDS in its product labelling and package inserts in 1983, 4 or 5?
If at that time the ARMA product was implicated, yes, but it wasn't.
When you say it wasn't implicated, what exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Bishop?
I mean, if it had been proven at that stage that the ARMA product called seroconversion, then yes, it would have appeared on the labelling, but there was no conclusions at that stage that the ARMA product did cause seroconversion.
So for
as
something,
far as I can recall.
Okay, so for something to be included on a label or in a package insert, the threshold, as far as you can recall, would have been that there needed to be a scientific study proving that the ARMA product had caused that condition.
Yeah, but as a layperson, that the whole what goes on a label and data sheet, etc., is purely between the regulatory people and the Department of Health, the DHSS.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Bishop, that what goes in the labels is something that is considered by the Department of Health. But there's a choice, is there not, from the pharmaceutical company as to what it includes in its labels. Would you accept that?
Oh, as far as I can understand, the company was dictated to what went on the label by the Department of Health. That's as I understood it.
Well, I won't ask you to go through the detail of the content of the warnings year after year, not least because they don't change, but I'm going to ask you to look at one example and then just invite your comment on it, if I may. Shamik, could we have ARMO 40145, please? So this is this happens to be May 1984, and you'll see it's a letter from ARMA's regulatory affairs or assistant regulatory affairs manager to the Department of Health's Medicines Division, and it's an application for a product licence for high potency factor VIII because the licence that's been in existence is about to expire. Okay?
Yeah.
If we go to paragraph 11. Sorry, page 11, Shamik, my apologies. And we look at the heading towards the bottom of the text, warnings and adverse effects. Now, I'm taking this as an example, Mr. Bishop. I'm going to invite you to take it from me, that the wording doesn't change very much in the period between 1976 and 1984. It says this, factor VIII is prepared from human plasma, each donation of which has been found negative for hepatitis B surface antigen by the radioimmunoassay method. In addition, each batch after reconstitution as recommended has been tested and found negative by the RIA method. However, since no completely reliable laboratory test is yet available to detect all potentially infectious plasma donations, the risk of transmitting viral hepatitis to patients is still present, and personnel administering and handling this material should also exercise appropriate caution. Products of this type are known to cause mild chills, nausea or stinging at the infusion site, the possibility of allergic reactions occurring with the use of AHF concentrates cannot be discounted. Now, would you accept that there's no reference to AIDS, no reference to non-A, non-B hepatitis specifically?
No.
Acknowledging that you were directly involved, Mr. Bishop, as you've explained to us, in the licensing application process and in deciding what went on the labels. But looking at this now, does it cause you any concern, the way in which the warnings and adverse effects are here described?
No, because being pure marketing and sales, I have no scientific. Well, I do have scientific knowledge, but I would bow to the superior knowledge of the medical and scientific people, whether it's the Department of Health or our own personnel.
With everything you learnt subsequently, so looking back now, Mr. Bishop, and knowing obviously perhaps rather more than you knew at the time, do you think that the ARMA's own labels should have spelt out the risk of non-A, non-B hepatitis specifically, or made some reference to the possible risk of AIDS?
No, not if that was the recommendation of the Department of Health and their own medical people.
May I just ask, before we move from this, can we just focus upon the very last paragraph on that page? The wording there is products of this type are known to cause mild chills. That might appear to the reader to be something which is not specific to ARMA, but is specific to the class of pharmaceutical of which this is one. Is that the way it appears to you?
Yes, and that was, I think that was the general scientific opinion of non-A, non-B hepatitis, that it was a mild flu-like reaction.
So can you help then with your earlier answer that it was really, I think it was to the effect that it was only if an ARMA product itself was implicated in a particular reaction that you would expect there to be a warning, rather than a product of the type of which ARMA was one example?
Now, I don't know what the time frame of that between this and that document was.
I see. Thank you.
We can take that down, thank you, Shamit. Just want to ask you a little more about your dealings with the Haemophilia Society next, Mr. Bishop. Roughly how often in the second half of the 70s, first half of the 1980s, would you have had interactions with the society?
Well, me personally, I would have. I can't recount the number of times, but perhaps once a month or once every couple of months, I would have met up with the General Secretary, David Waters, at that time, with the Haemophilia Society.
And what would, broadly speaking, have been the purpose of those meetings?
Well, to discuss the current issues and perhaps discuss the format of their or the arrangements for their Haemophilia Society meetings in ways which we could support them in that.
Is it fair to conclude, given that your role was in sales and marketing, that at least one purpose of interaction with the Haemophilia Society would be to, through the Haemophilia Society, to try and promote sales of Factor VIII?
No, certainly not. No. ARMA were considered a very valuable member of the team of treating and looking at treating the haemophilia patients, and our association with the Haemophilia Society was part of that ethos.
Do you recall whether you ever alerted the Society in 1985 or 1986 to the possibility that Armour's heat treatment procedures might be ineffective?
No, I don't recall any discussion like that at all.
Could we have a look at PRSE 303929, please, Seamus, next? So this is a document that shows financial contributions being made by pharmaceutical companies, including but certainly not limited to Armour, to the Haemophilia Society. Doesn't break it down by individual company, although we can see some years, for example, 1980. No, I think there are no years in which you're the only contributor. So we can see relatively substantial sums overall being paid by pharmaceutical companies to the Haemophilia Society. Who within Armour would decide how much Armour was going to pay to the Haemophilia Society in a given year?
That would be during the budgeting process for the following year, and would have been agreed, well, proposed perhaps by me in the formulation of the budgets for the following year.
And would the funding be for a particular purpose? Would it be for sponsorship of the Society's meetings or sponsorship of the Society's publication, or was it a general contribution to the Society's coffers?
No, any of those, any or all of those categories.
Was it Armour's expectation in making those contributions that somehow its products would be regarded as approved by the Haemophilia Society?
Well, I don't know what you mean by approved by the...
Let me put it a different way, Mr. Bishop. What was Armour's purpose in providing not insubstantial sums of money to the Haemophilia Society?
Well, bearing in mind they are a charity and are very, very strong supporters of their members and their groups. Important for them to be kept up to date on all scientific developments in the interests of their members, and attendance at international and national meetings, would be expensive for them as a charity, and we, along with other companies, felt it appropriate to support that charity.
I'm going to ask you next about interactions with haemophilia centres. Sorry, Mr. Bishop.
No, I was just going to say, looking at that document again, perhaps I shouldn't say it, but I will. It's conspicuous by its absence is the BPL, the national supplier. Sorry, I'll move on.
I'm going to ask you next about interactions with haemophilia centres and clinicians and how Armour went about generally promoting its product in the UK. If we can start by looking at PRSE 303437. You'll see this is a table which has, for 1980 and 1981, the quantities of commercial factor VIII concentrates used in the UK by manufacturer. And we can see from the second line that Armour's product, its factor VIII product, is the product most widely in usage in 1980 and 1981. So it might be fair to say that Armour was dominating the market by that time. How had that been achieved, Mr. Bishop?
because of the the whole concept and ethos of the armour operation, to be we were accepted and we were the gold standard in many ways. We're accepted as an essential member of the team, looking after the interests of the UK haemophilia patient, supporting those responsible for their treatment, the haemophilia centre directors, the nursing personnel, physiotherapist personnel, and of course the Haemophilia Society, and with the experts, the whole lot. It's all down to the whole ethos of the armour operation. You know, not only in the States but the UK. But you know, we had a very real responsibility, and this was accepted and appreciated by the patients, the haemophilia centre directors alike, and therefore, you know, we very deservedly earned our place as the market leader. Coupled with the fact that, of course, we had a very good product.
If we go to UHDB 5012, please. This is an example of a letter written by you to a haemophilia clinician. This is from November 1977, and it's to Dr. Winfield. First of all, we can see, just if we go back to the top of the page, we can see prominently displayed that sticker, Factor 8, 1,540 donors. What was that meant to convey to the recipient of the letter?
That was an indication of the average number of donations making up a batch of armour material. Which we were particularly proud of, because that compared with, you know, 25,000 donations applicable to other products.
And does that reflect? I'm sorry, Mr. Bishop, carry on.
No, carry on.
Does that reflect then an understanding that of the larger the pool size, the greater the risk of viral transmission?
Yes.
Now, if we look further down this letter, it refers to, in the first paragraph, the contract agreed with the Department of Health. Prices are then set out. Under the table, it says, as in previous years, we've tendered our best prices right from the start of the contract in order to ensure the least disruption to the work of your centre. Not our intention to amend these in any way during the period of the contract. Over the page, first paragraph says, very conscious of the fact that all centres are working to very tight budgets. We're also fully aware of the implications of the new contract prices in respect of maintaining or increasing current levels of treatment and home therapy programmes within the limits of these budgets. An analysis of the new terms will reveal the true economic advantage of placing some, if not all, of your commercial concentrate business with armour. By purchasing Factor 8 against a given pound sterling budget, your centre will be able to obtain between 50% and 97.5% more Factor 8 concentrate than other commercial products approved for sale on the DHSS contract. By purchasing Factor 8, there'll be no need to reduce your programmes involving the use of commercial concentrate in order to keep expenditure within the confines of your budget for 1978. Coupled with this considerable price differential are the added benefits of our presentation. I'll come back to that point about the presentation in a moment. And then you talk in the next paragraph about Factor 8 being firmly established as a leading commercial concentrate in many UK centres, proven quality of the product, the flexibility of the presentation and the economic advantages outlined above. This letter places a lot of weight upon what's said to be the financial advantage to centres in purchasing Factor 8 as compared to another commercial concentrate, doesn't it?
Yes, yes.
Can you help us in understanding the suggestion that a centre would be able to obtain between 50 and 97.5% more Factor 8 concentrate than other commercial products?
Well, I can't at this moment work out the differentials between the other products, and off the top of my head, but that would have been calculated out.
So, essentially, you're offering Armour's product, the Factor 8 product, more cheaply than other commercial concentrates.
Effectively, yes.
And did that play a significant part in Armour's dominance of the market in the UK?
Initially, it would have been because in the pre-marketing exercise and research, it very quickly became obvious by talking with international clinicians that the UK haemophiliac patient was being grossly undertreated in terms of the number of units with which they were being infused. For example, places like the Bond Clinic, Dr. Brackman and Inga-Marie Nielsen in Karolinska in Sweden were showing that applying or infusing far higher doses of Factor 8 seriously improved the quality of the life and the joints of haemophiliac patients. And at the current rate the UK was prescribing was far below any of these other centres. So, what we were in fact doing was to hopefully to enable clinicians to up the dosages to the recommended doses in other centres to improve the quality of treatment and the life of the UK haemophiliac patient and their families.
Just in relation to pool sizes, I think we looked at the sticker 1,540 donors, and your statement, I think, sets out a broad recollection of around 1,500 donors. Can I ask you to look at one further document on this, which is at ARM...
Sorry, can I correct you there? It's not... that should have read donations. That applies to 1,540 donations into a pool of plasma. That wasn't the number of actual donors. That was donations.
Thank you. If we go to ARMO 40507, now this is the note of a meeting that took place with the Department of Health in March of 1986, and this is in the context of the seroconversions to HDLV3 following treatment with Factor 8 that was heat treated. We'll come back to that. We can see this is a document that was copied to you. If we go over the page, under the heading manufacturing process, there's reference to the presentation of data by Dr. Riddell, and then it says this: we were asked the size of our donor pool, which was defined as between 5,000 and 20,000 donors. And then it goes on to talk about what the virus challenge might then be. Can you assist us?
That's the number of donors in the system.
Right.
It's not the donor. It's not the. That's the number of donors. That's not the number of donations making up a batch of material.
So the reference there to size of the donor pool, and I understand this is not your document, Mr. Bishop, but you'd read that as being the number of donors available to Armour in the United States generally. Would you?
Yes, that 5 to 20,000. Yeah, depending on any one of the plasmapheresis centres.
Okay.
Plasma alliance centres.
In terms of the number of donations in a pool, did that change significantly as far as you can recall, but from 1976 onwards through to the mid-80s?
No. It was always known to be that number.
And then, if I might just ask you to look at one further document before we break. BPLL 0002161. This is another letter from you, this is now July 1978, to consultant haematologists. So again, it's a sales letter. I don't mean that as in a pejorative sense. And if we look at the third paragraph, you say this: the proven quality of the product, the flexibility of the presentation, and the economical price structure outlined below present a good case for the inclusion of Factor VIII in your routine or emergency treatment programme. So I'm not going to ask you again about the price, but what did you mean by the flexibility of the presentation?
Well, so that was a range of potencies between 250 and 500 and I think 1,000 units per vial, which the clinician could select from according to the condition in which he was treating. Whether it was on a prophylactic basis or spontaneous bleed. So he had a flexibility of choice of without under-treating or over-treating, plus the fact that we supplied a sophisticated home treatment kit free of charge which contained the water for injection, needles, etc., etc. So that's what was meant by the presentation.
Were there specific home treatment kits tailored towards children?
No, they would be the same kits, because the water for reconstitution would be the same, whether it was going into a child or an adult.
We've had some evidence, for example, and I'm afraid I can't off the top of my head recall whether it related to Armour's product or another product, but we've heard some evidence of the home treatment kit coming with Mr. Men plasters or Mr. Men stickers. Was that something which Armour did?
Yes, yeah.
So, I note the time. Would this be a good moment for a break?
Yes, it is. So we'll take a break now until 12 o'clock. This is the first of the breaks there'll be during this afternoon, during today. There'll be more this afternoon. At any break, you must not discuss the evidence which you have been giving or the evidence which you think you may yet be asked to give with anyone, whoever that person may be. You can talk about anything else, but not about that. So I'll see you at 12.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Brian.